Welcome. This is Leonard Lee, Managing Director of neXt, and thank you for joining today's reThink webcast. And in this session, we will be discussing the future cloud and the Cloud Continuum with special panelists from IBM. And for those of you who are not familiar with neXt, let me introduce our firm really quickly. We are a San Diego-based boutique consulting and research firm focused on providing experience-based advisory services to our clients to inspire their digital future. And we advise across a wide range of digital topics, drawing from the expertise and experience of our executive consultants and analysts. And today, I'm very honored to be joined by some good friends from IBM who've been kind enough to participate in a panel discussion with neXt. Cristene, Christophe, Martin, would you kindly introduce yourselves and share briefly your wonderful background?
Sure, Leonard. Thank you so much. We look forward to talking to the group today. I am the Research Director for Electronics in IBM's Institute for Business Value. And what we do is we create fact-based, future-focused, strategic perspectives around topics that are mission-critical to electronics firms to help them increase their value and to change their operations leading to their digital future.
Good morning. So my name is Christophe Begue. I'm part of basically the IBM sales team for the electronics industry, where I have a dual responsibility of business development, working with our top clients, and then also a solution strategy. What solution should we bring to market for electronic clients in M-based San Francisco?
Good morning. I'm Martin Kienzle. I'm the IBM Research Electronics Industry Leader, bringing our research results to bear on the problems of our electronics industry customers. The Global Technology Outlook is our annual process in which IBM Research alerts our CEO and SVPs to technical trends that affect our customers' businesses, and that typically leads to great strategy decisions, such as ultimately, for instance, to the creation of the IoT division.
I'm also pleased to introduce neXt principals and panelists, Akshay, Sharma, and Dean Freeman. Akshay is a renowned industry analyst and consultant who's been working with some of the leading tech firms and was a research director with Gartner Inc. for 10 years. And as a principal with neXt, Akshay covers various domains, including blockchain, network and data center technologies, IoT communications, security, and telecom digital transformation. And Dean has a distinguished 17-year career with Gartner as a research vice president with the semiconductor group. And Dean's research focus was on the semiconductor forecast and leading the Internet of Things Center of Excellence for Gartner. We welcome his expertise on various IoT topics and his deep knowledge of the semiconductor industry and semiconductor end market. Cristene, before we start the discussion, can you share with the audience what the IBM IBV is and the role that it plays within the context of IBM itself?
Sure. Well, IBM Research, the much larger and venerable generation of all of our patents, and et cetera, and work on very, very future-focused projects. The IBV is a much smaller research organization that focuses on strategic issues, generally by industry and domain. And as such, we have people who work on electronics, we have people who work on telco, we have people who work travel and transportation or oil and gas. We also, at the same time, have people who represent disciplines or domains, people who work on AI or people who work on emerging technologies, et cetera, people who work on operations. So we have a group of professionals, each dedicated to owning a particular line of inquiry and creating thought leadership that focuses on the future. And that's how the Cloud Continuum actually came about. We published a little more than a year, 9 separate reports pertaining to issues that are mission critical to the electronics market.
So we had a chance to read the white paper, Navigating the Cloud Continuum, that you, Martin, and Christophe authored. And it's a very insightful piece. We really enjoyed reading it, and we also appreciated the thinking quite a bit. And as we all know and have experienced, cloud is a broad topic, a multi-dimensional conversation. We wanted to know is what inspired you guys to research this topic and for what purpose?
It started with a set of findings that came back from the IBV that were very focused on IT metrics and on IT benefits for cloud. And we started talking about this, and Martin and I got going on this. The problem is that the business now that is the next great adoption challenge. And business has so many wonderful use cases that every time we talk about IT, the metrics don't line up. So how do you go about understanding where the value is and understanding how IT and the business actually partner to create the next great round of value in the cloud continuum? And then at the same time, what does the business need to know in order to help communicate to IT what they need, and how does IT understand what the business needs so that they become more approachable? So how do we round out this partnership and help explain how the market has moved from an IT benefits case to a business use case?
So it's really targeted at the IT leadership and the business leadership then, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. But, you know, the whole thing is at the same time, the market has changed dramatically, Leonard, where in electronics, it was private only. And it was, we need to keep everything inside. We need to keep everything secure. But all of a sudden, these great public use cases were coming up and great data sources that you wanted to tap into. So you had to be able to actually navigate across a continuum of clouds to be able to have the greatest level of benefit and aiming for that hybrid cloud approach.
What angle did you take with cloud in this work? Because the cloud is still pretty cloudy. There's different levels of conversations that you can have with cloud. And I think one of the things that we want to establish for this discussion is a bit of a level setting in terms of the aspect of the cloud that we're talking about.
In some ways, I'm not so much calling it cloud, but it's sort of as a service. You start with infrastructure, you go to up the stack through platform, software, and then business process as a service. And in a sense, just like public-private cloud is a continuum, so is the level of semantic or where you're going to be in the stack. And to me, that is actually one of the big changes. When we talked about cloud earlier, it was mainly just infrastructure as a service. The real leverage comes up when you go to SaaS or business process as a service. And this then also is in the vector where you head more to the business side of a company as opposed to the IT side.
Okay, so let's move on to the next topic here, which is the question of what are electronics companies doing today with cloud? What are the kind of values that electronics companies are chasing with the cloud? And maybe we can start with you, Christophe.
Yeah, so based on the numbers here, you can see that everybody is looking at it, who is piloting some cloud. In some cases, it's really not new news. You know, there's been some form of availability of infrastructure as a service for a long time, or a number of emerging technology that were only developed as SaaS. But I think it's more prevalent than that. I think more and more you see in the other numbers that more and more our clients are looking at it not as a cheaper point solution, but as a matter of strategy. How is that aligning with the overall business goals? And how would cloud be an element of their transformation they're trying to execute along the line of what Martin was saying, in their desire to become more as a service company themselves to their clients? Where is cloud playing into that option from a cost, from a flexibility, from an agility? And then, so in that sense, we see cloud as an element of their innovation. When they look at new business model, maybe around IoT, extending an electronics device with some sort of service, distributing content, then the cloud is what will make that happen. So it's not only taking care of the back office, but it's more embedded into the product, the services that they bring to market themselves.
You have that number there, 54%. Are we seeing a shift in intent or awareness amongst the electronic companies and leadership?
Yes, because it aligns with a change of point of view, right? So maybe the older definition of cloud, it's only public and it's only about infrastructure. But then all of that is taking place in the context in which they operate today. They are a legacy operation. The fact that they have different level of requirement in terms of privacy on the data, depending on the area of a business. So there is a desire to use cloud in all these different areas, but it's clear there is not one single way of doing it. You put all of that into some sort of public infrastructure. So what is the best way of leveraging cloud and its opportunity for agility, but in the context of a requirement of my business, be it manufacturing, in customer relationship, is designing new products. So that's where this hybrid comes. It's hybrid because it operates in a hybrid environment with different requirements. Multiple solutions.
But there is a lot of function that still quote unquote on premise. If you want to make that more effective, then doing a private cloud is a first step. But at the same time, you have to connect this to all of the applications, all of the solutions, the business processes that you run on the public cloud. That is, if you want to have a coherent business, you need to connect all of those business processes. Some of them you want to have more control. And the private cloud is efficiency, but they're not in isolation.
This is where a lot of this quote-unquote shadow IT comes up as well, where if IT isn't moving fast enough for the business will go, for instance, get its own chatbot for service, or head toward doing something with a full public cloud view. And the challenge becomes, how do you box that around? How do you make sure that your data is secure and that your integrations are protected? Because the business might not be paying attention to all of the right IT criteria, but the business wants to move to facilitate innovation and not necessarily have a full understanding of the impacts of those actions. So you've got to be able to look across this continuum to be able to balance and install the appropriate protections and compliance guidelines.
In some cases, the hybrid nature is really what develops the innovation. So an example is manufacturing. So let's say you wanted to open 6 new factories in 4 different countries and really want to control the access to some of your manufacturing recipes, some of your product IP. And you cannot really afford to have a system that are not standardized. So how do you balance the fact that it needs to be super efficient and locally managed, or at least with access to local equipment, and yet totally standardized and controlled from central? So that's where now there are solutions that combine central management, local running, moving some of the data to the cloud, keeping some of the data locally, managing all the IP access from a central location with limited IT support. So inherently, in that case, the most innovative solution is hybrid, and we see more and more.
Let's move on to the topic du jour, the Cloud Continuum, which is the core element of the white paper. This sounds really cool. I want to know who came up with this term, Cloud Continuum. I suspect it was Cristene, no? Or was it Martin? This is a real question.
You know what? I think
or are you guys going to argue?
I think that it was on the IBV side, but it was after many, many conversations with Martin and Christophe. I think that everybody kind of had a hand in it. I'm sorry. I know that's the hack standard answer, but it's probably true.
Okay. All right. Great. And so I'm sure that the audience.
We have revisionist history.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, you have that liberty, right? So I'm sure that the audience is chomping at the bit to figure out what this is, or have you explain what Cloud Continuum is and what is Cloud Continuum.
As we talked about before, and Christophe just mentioned, private cloud was used by specific parts of the organization, especially in protection of IP or very low latency responses. And then public cloud all of a sudden opened up these brand new data sets and proved that there weren't the challenges as people originally assumed.
The solutions or the piece parts that we're trying to implement are not standing alone. They have to be connected. Some applications, they have to be a lot of control, a lot of short latency. So obviously they have to be private. Cloud provides a large amount of data, a large amount of services. And by going hybrid, I can actually start, and now we're getting really into the business process innovation. By going hybrid, we actually can allow companies then to focus on what is their core value. That is, they're implementing what their core value is, and other processes they actually get as a service from the cloud. For instance, CRM, for instance, HR. Those are a lot of things that now, if you don't think this is really where you want to spend your innovation, you just get them from the cloud. But on the other hand, there are certain things about personnel, for instance, that you actually want to keep private. By allowing this kind of composition of business processes out of different services, this is how the hybrid cloud emerges. Another aspect is that you get from the public cloud, all of a sudden, a lot of services, a lot of information that can help you. For instance, if you've got logistics and you've got weather information, traffic information, market information for supply chain from the cloud, you get an incredible amount of enrichment that you would not get otherwise. And so this sort of composition and the innovation of your business processes is actually what's driving hybrid.
And now we see also adding to that the emergence of more and more high-end or very powerful computing at the edge. So, the idea that you could only do big complex compute in a cloud and then maybe do local stuff, the stuff that may be lower end or needs to be really controlled is sort of changing. No, it's more aligning the right level of continuum to the dynamic of the decision making, the ability to manage the data locally in some cases, because that's what makes sense, both bandwidth and speed, and then benefiting from the cloud for maybe the secondary insight and then the enrichment with external data, as Martin mentioned.
This is Akshay. One of the notes I published was on this idea of cloud services brokering, or being able to cloud burst on demand. Do you envision that this become part of this continuum, that maybe applications may start off in one, let's say, private cloud, burst onto the public cloud, and then maybe have mobile edge computing and have an in-between cloud as part of this continuum that maybe applications can move over time?
Yeah, and in some cases, we already see that, right? For example, in the design process, there are some steps that are inherently super compute intensive in testing, validation, for which some sort of burst capacity is perfect, and we see that also more on the demand side, where there may be a commerce or marketing function that are inherently cyclical, for which the bursting of a cloud demand, it makes sense. I think there may be also areas where you would like to access functions or data that are only available on the cloud, enriching with data or accessing type of analytics that would really only make sense on the cloud, but you don't need that all the time. So you access that in your process at the right moment, put that in your continuum.
Yeah, there may be some requirements, maybe latency, maybe performance might be better in one domain versus another. There may be even regulatory requirements for privacy. Maybe Sarbanes-Oxley compliance says things have to be on-prem at the end of the month because of compliance issues, or for privacy issues, maybe things need to be in a certain domain.
I mean, that's what we're seeing actually in finance. There's a lot of countries actually are saying, okay, data have to stay within a certain country.
Exactly.
Also, in many cases across industry with personally identifiable data, if you look at where we're going, this trend is only going to increase.
Right, especially with GDPR really becoming a reality in Europe. Consumer data rights are going to be increasingly an important consideration for enterprises as well as vendors.
But here you could make the argument, and I think we're making that argument, that one of the best ways to be GDPR compliant and whatever future regulation would come in is to align with the cloud provider in your continuum, which really understand the issue and can really manage it at scale, as opposed to replicating a bunch of a system that may or may not be compliant, and you always have a weak point somewhere.
Martin, I want to go back to your comment earlier about cloud as a service. How does that relate to what we're looking at here with the Cloud Continuum? Because here with the Cloud Continuum, we're talking a private, public, and this bridge called hybrid. Where do the as a service come into play here as we think about Cloud Continuum?
On private cloud, in many cases, we simply start with infrastructure as a service. That is, people use this in some cases just as what sometimes is referred as lift and shift. That is, get more capacity flexibility in the local IT expenditure. However, as you go up the stack, then clearly to software as a service or business process as a service, clearly they're coming from the outside. And at that point, then we actually get to something that you can call either a business transformation, or sometimes we call it business reinvention. You actually take the fact that you don't have to do everything on your own, that you can concentrate on your core, get some other things from the outside, and then this is business composition as a service, and that happens only at the upper layers of the stack. So in a sense, you've got the continuum there. One comment, though, is when you get really really into business transformation, at that point, simple lift and shift of your on-premise system design is usually not going to work. This is where we've seen that you actually need to step back and rethink how you actually do this from a transformation perspective.
Move on to our next topic here, which is the future of cloud.
Within the neXt team, we're really excited to learn more about the future of cloud, and we've seen many perspectives to this, from the private cloud to the public cloud. But we're also seeing an in-between cloud, with carriers now stepping up with their mobile edge computing initiatives, their core central office being re-architected as a data center at the edge for high speed, low latency, network slicing on demand for 5G, for IoT. For the IBM folks, how do you see cloud evolving?
So if you look at the edge, and somebody actually, I think it was Christophe who mentioned a little bit earlier that we're seeing a lot of processing power that can move to the edge. And so one of the things that we're actually looking at is that a lot of what people call edge computing today, in many cases, is really highly dependent on some kind of centralized hierarchical structure. And as there's more processing power at the edge, and also as we get more artificial intelligence, that we get more thinking power at the edge, there will be a lot more independence. And that will change the relationship between the edge devices such that they're not dependent at the lower layer, but they're actually get more autonomous, but they can then more easily consume a rich set of services that they get in particular from the public cloud. So that certainly is one kind of development that I'm expecting to happen.
I could envision a case where we're playing a video game and maybe we get targeted ad insertion from the public cloud based on analytics of the demographic. Maybe we get some ultra low latency gaming from the mobile edge, and maybe there's even a wearable that has some compute power. So with all these changes, how do you see how these changes will impact the way we think of the cloud continuum? Will these be like discrete? Will these be truly seamless, where sessions will flow from one device to another or one cloud domain to another seamlessly, or will it be stop and go?
In some cases, we already see some, maybe not seamless, but some integration. I mean, two examples, the autonomous car, where you know that for exactly the same type of decision, should I brake or should I not? Depending on the speed and the closeness of a car in front of you, you would like the decision to be entirely done at the edge, or to consider maybe some other information related to the other cars around, maybe done, somewhat locally, or related to some much larger decision process. Should I brake because I want to buy a coffee, right? So same decision, but the context being totally different. The place where that compute will take place, it will be totally different. Another example, in manufacturing, now we're doing project where we're looking at high definition pictures of product, trying to decide whether that product is of good quality or not. That decision needs to happen within a couple of milliseconds. So definitely at the edge. But then the next decision, and once you've done that, then what do you do next? Should I retest? Should I maybe do some sort of rework? Potentially that's done on private cloud or on a public cloud. And then there's a larger decision. It says, well, now that I've rejected 5% of my product, what do I do? Because I'm obviously late in completing that order. So these are not entirely seamless, but tightly integrated set of decisions that can happen in a well-orchestrated way across very different type of compute environment.
Great. Yeah, I could see even with that braking example, maybe it's weather related. You should slow down. And that's probably at the public cloud level because it's more of a aggregating information from a geography. But if it's local braking because you're about to bump into the wall, that may be really local compute, literally within the car, perhaps.
Exactly.
So how will this evolution change the way technology leaders need to think of cloud and cloud-related opportunities?
Well, there's a lot of SaaS solution that, while entirely on the cloud, were really conceived as a pretty close set of function. What you subscribe to is what you get. And if you wanted to integrate that with some other cloud-delivered solution or some other combination of technology coming from somewhere else, it's you back to a fairly complex integration project. If we contrast that to a much more platform-based set of capabilities that are available that you can stitch together for the need of a particular particular process would be probably a different way of selling technology as well as building applications. We already see some of that, and not everybody is interested in developing their own stitched together application. So there's a market for the totally tailored and then the more the platform plays. So I think it's not going to be one or the other. It will be all of that.
Yeah, and I think one important point is the stitching together is sort of what sometimes people call that function is made available as a microservice. And those microservices, the more they're standardized, the more they're easily consumed. They could come from the public cloud, from the private cloud. They could come from the edge. And it's not just the function itself, but now it's also the kind of data, the kind of context they provide. And so on this picture, you got the Internet of Things on the right there. It's actually, okay, what matters and was mentioned earlier, if it's the weather that causes braking or some kind of traffic behavior, is it the other cars? Is it an accident 2 miles down the road? Those are all different kinds of data sources that actually at some point all have to come together, consumed, evaluated. So it's part of the microservices, but then also part of the data, part of the specific context in which you're in that matters and that selects. And this gives then this dynamic behavior that Akshay asked about a little bit earlier.
Yeah, and the speed of that adjudication is what's important.
5G probably also accelerate the movement to the edge. Over the last several years, it was difficult, or rather the processing power increased or the cost decreased much more rapid than the communications. With 5G, we're going to get a huge step. So there's going to be huge discontinuities. A lot of things then will actually move to the edge or can be done at the edge because the balance between processing and our communication is going to change. Also latency. And maybe one more point, if we come to this composition of businesses where rather than having a vertically integrated business by an individual company, but where your business process actually is composed of services from a whole number of independent companies, this actually is an opening up that adds additional risk. And so this is where I think blockchain is actually going to get increasingly important, because once you open up your business processes to include a lot of other companies, data from different sources, actually having that kind of trust, it actually says, okay, with this composition, I understand exactly who did what when. This sort of composition type business actually will need blockchain to create sort of a coherent perspective on the data, on some of the data at least.
I agree with you, Martin, that 5G is going to have an important role in shifting the compute model out there as well as the overall ICT marketplace. Obviously, IoT applications, as they continue to emerge, they're going to create a demand for more distributed applications where the compute, the data is intelligently and dynamically deployed at the edge at the source of consumption or need. One of the questions I want to ask the IBM team is how you treat edge, because is there a public edge? Is there a private edge? Is edge just an extension of cloud? What's IBM's point of view?
I don't know that we have a final point of view on that. I think, as Martin said earlier, we see the edge as a place where a bunch of different functions from compute to data will be distributed that contribute to the constitution of an overall cloud fabric. So it's not, it goes from the top to the edge, but it's different modalities from public, private, and edge that constitute that complex fabric. Not so much hierarchical, but more distributed.
I don't know whether IBM has an official perspective here, but Martin's personal perspective lines up with what Christophe just said. That is, I think we'll be moving away from this hierarchical perspective that's on this picture here to something where you've got much more equally authorized components, sort of like generic distributed computing. And then the individual components actually have different properties. So in some cases, you trust them more. In other cases, you may trust them less. They may be authorized. Business conditions in how you interact them may be different, but rather you get a composition of services from different parts, and whether they're quote unquote edge or not, that's a question, I guess, that's left to the interpreter.
I could easily see that the edge becomes, as Leonard mentioned, both a hybrid in itself. There may be on edge, and then there may be carrier hosted as part of mobile edge computing initiatives like the CORD initiative, the central office being re-architected as a nano data center within the main street of every area code. Well, that is a form of edge right there. And then you have the public cloud, like the mega data centers that might be 100 miles away or 1,000 miles away. So I could see this whole continuum, even within edge, might be both private, public, and then mega public as well.
Yeah, and that brings up a point by both of you as you're talking about this continuum, because as you move into the business world, won't this continuum and how we structure this continuum be driven by the business decisions? We wrote a long time ago, architect will drive costs in the IoT. So you have to make the decision as an end user, am I going to process at the edge? Am I going to process at the near edge? Or am I going to process in the cloud? Which then starts to line up with this edge public cloud, private cloud, as well as that distributed and hybrid cloud that we've been discussing. So those are all excellent points with respect to how a business company is going to have to make their, I'll call it distributed decisions, and actually have to very carefully evaluate costs to make sure that they're implementing the hybrid cloud solution that best meets not only their business needs, but their economic needs.
I think we talked a bit about that in the white paper, where we've developed these 4 criteria that we looked at around business value, data needs, speed, and security, and being able to adjudicate amongst all 4 of them. But I think that you need to be able to sum those up to look at how you need to do things, and then cost being among those considerations. But I think that there are parts of the equation you need to take because they are mission critical to your business. And let's say you're a streaming service, there are parts of that you need to have massive amounts of continuity on, where there might be customer service cases where you can deal with a whole lot more latency. You need to be able to allow those sorts of criteria for decision making to be consistent across the business, so that you can make and understand significant amounts of business value. So it's not just about making the decision, it's about having a litmus test that allows the business and IT to understand the decision well.
Yes, no, I would agree with that. So now we've been talking a little bit about the future of cloud and the segue that Cristene just made into what is the value of cloud for business? How do you arrive at that business value, and how do you make those decisions to get that continuum and to look for where that business value exists versus the cost of implementation? These are a lot of the key questions that we're hearing from CIOs and business leaders all the time. In the electronics industry, tech leaders within organizations tend to be fairly tech savvy, mostly because it's their job and they focus on it so much. But it's probably the nature of the industry, and the question of the value of cloud can still be difficult conversation within the business, either at the strategic level, tactical, business, technical, or all of the above. So in your white paper, you feature this cloudable criteria. Can one of you volunteer to go over the framework and how it can ease the cloud value discussion for enterprise?
So one of the reasons we looked at creating a set of cloudable criteria is to allow a conversation to happen that is focused at the use case level, to make sure all of the elements get addressed in one unified fashion, and that you can stack use cases up and against each other to better determine those kinds of business needs. So it allows you to work across various parts of the business instead of specifically needing somebody in the business to translate to IT types of speak. So how do you allow each of the separate use cases to address whether it's business value, how you support specific business objectives and strategies, or whether it's data needs in terms of the type of data you need, the frequency, the quality and the accessibility of that kind of information, and how you look at speed and the latency you might need to work on. We talked a bit about manufacturing lines. With IoT, it's possible to detect at the endpoint that the refrigerator is failing. But what happens if, as Christophe brought up earlier, you can do that with visual inspection and detect that before it ever came off the line? Much better use. So how do we not look at focusing on the end of the game and focusing on as early in the process we can bring value? There was the sense that the public cloud was not secure initially. And we think that the market has turned away and has understood that there is a great deal of security As Christophe reminded me fairly early on in this process, most people would declare that their human resource records are very, very private and things that you need to maintain a high level of security around. And we're looking at 40 to 50% of the marketplace having already relocated to public cloud for that kind of data. So we are understanding that security is no longer the issue it once was.
Excellent. And so you're helping companies develop both the security question and answer their security concerns, as well as going ahead and helping them develop different business cases in order to show the value within the company.
You brought up this private-public piece earlier. Compliance is one of those great external use cases. You need to be able to access across the globe multiple types of issues, whether it's the ability of a product to contain a particular element or the parts per million it can contain, the particular shipping regulations that you might have, or percentage of labor complete, the way you have in Brazil, et cetera. You need to be able to target and look at and examine those sorts of things. And those are all external databases that exist around the globe. They are public, but how do you bring them in and match them to your own needs?
Yeah, and that's a great segue into the next question with respect to what are some of the emerging use cases that you see based upon our discussion on the future of cloud and your hypothesis of how it's going to evolve? Or how will the evolution of the cloud continuum present new value opportunities to the electronic industry? I think you've touched on that already a little bit, but now can you expand on that based upon the discussion we've just had?
Absolutely. In this set of use cases, we all have favorites. While chatbots are relatively well understood, I'd like to touch on that second one around technical support and service. Right now, we're starting to see in our own solutions, we have the ability to not just create applications that bring together sizable amounts of internal and external data, whether you need the original BOM from a piece of equipment that you're trying to repair, or you need to understand what the externally distributed manuals about that particular model number or serial number have. And then you need to understand how to go about those repairs and, for instance, any notes or external pieces, and then you might have video that sits elsewhere. And then you might also be able to have a new technician working on that, and you might want to layer over AR and VR and be able to guide somebody through a repair on site without necessarily having to be present. That sort of continuum goes from internal only data to combining multiple data sources to actually invoking new types of technology to layer over at a customer site. And you can start to see how that has contributory value as you go along.
Excellent. And that's actually one of my favorite use cases for the IoT, moving into the industrial with the AR, VR types of technologies. Thank you, Cristene.
Thank you, Dean. Let's see if we can go through the key takeaways here. What are the key nuggets that we would like our audience to walk away with today? Cristene, maybe you could start us off with this first takeaway.
We had done some research as part of our C-suite study, and the role of the CIO will change between now and 2020. Whether that is improving cybersecurity risk and postures to be able to address that, that will go from, according to the research, from 47 to 77% tomorrow, where it will be baked into a CIO role. To be able to collaborate on strategy execution from about 43% to about 72%. And then for IoT in particular, building a platform across the business, becoming a digital platform for the enterprise goes from 27% today to 69%. And I think that those sorts of pieces are relatively important, where you have a far less growth trajectory and flawlessly executing IT operations or updating legacy platforms. You really need to be able to address those. That role is very different.
I couldn't agree with you more. The next takeaway here is get your cloud right to enable your digital reinvention?
Specifically in the electronics industry, we see a lot of more traditional box product-oriented business model being jeopardized by the emergence of new entrants or new business model. A lot of those new business models are cloud delivered or have a strong cloud component. So at the core of digital reinvention of a lot of our clients will be the ability to transform themselves through a more agile, platform-oriented infrastructure, which will be that cloud continuum. So it is not an IT-only decision. It goes to the core of the future of many of our clients.
We always use use cases to bring together this relationship between the business and IT organizations to be able to concretely define what the desired outcomes are, what metrics we're trying to influence, what data we need, and where the transformations happen. And that facilitates a much greater agreement. So we always recommend starting with use cases to deliver business value and to get organizations on the same page.
Given all of the uncertainties, or rather the great promises of developments such as improved power at the edge, artificial intelligence, 5G, IoT, it is absolutely mandatory that we get the agility to quickly absorb those. Using microservices is probably the best way of doing that, because one of the things that allows also companies to move to OpEx from CapEx, and it creates speed of implementation if you don't have all of the details yourself. That actually, I think, is the approach that you need to take to adaptation. I just mentioned 5G and IoT earlier. I think there will be a discontinuous change in the sense that there is going to be more communications bandwidth available. That is, the balance will change. In fact, we've seen some companies look at what's called 5G NR, new radio, where they don't need carriers to deploy it, but they can deploy that over entire factories, just like a single network similar to Wi-Fi. And the additional data coming from IoT, then delivered via 5G, will actually be huge drivers. And in order to consume those, we'll need the cloud.
Dean, Martin, Christophe, we want to thank you for your time and sharing your great work. And Akshay, Dean, as usual, thank you both for your presence and participation on this panel. If you would like to find out more about NextCurve's points of view on this and other digital topics of the day, go to our site, which is www.nextcurve.com, and you'll find research notes, media, and replays of this webcast, as well as others on our site. And to keep up to date with all the great stuff we're doing here at NextCurve, follow us on our site by subscribing. And we are also on Twitter and YouTube. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and friend us on Twitter to get live feeds and coverage of industry conferences and other great events that we have throughout the year. I also wanted to give you some information about IBM's Institute of Business Value. If you wanted to find out more about them, go to their subsite on IBM.com and just scan the QR code to get there. Cristene, are there any other featured and upcoming works of note that you'd like to mention here very quickly?
Yep, we've just released our C-suite and a perspective for electronics. Some of the really best parts of it will be available through our IBM sales team and the client executive, because we've got a whole lot of richness in the study that is really valuable and talks about, through 4 chapters, what is causing reinvention in the industry, how is it being reckoned, how to move from insight to advantage, how platforms are important, and how culture is changing. Feel free to reach out to any of us via Twitter or LinkedIn and ask questions, and we'll do our best to track down data and or perspective that can help you solve your business problems. Leonard, thank you so much for this opportunity on behalf of the IBM team. We're really excited to partner with NextCurve on bringing these sorts of thought-leading conversations together.
Same here. We really appreciate all of you. And you can also find the white paper, Navigating the Cloud Continuum, on the IBM site, and we've included a little QR code here for you to facilitate your navigation to the material, and you can just download that in a PDF format, I believe. With that, contact me by email or telephone for a scoping discussion to figure out how NextCurve can be part of your cloud journey. And of course, you can contact Cristene if you wanted to find out more about the IBV, the Cloud Continuum, and other research, and how IBM can also be part of your cloud journey. And with that, thank you everyone for attending. And I also wanted to thank our distinguished IBM panelists, Akshay and Dean, for some great discussions. I hope all of you found it insightful and enjoyable. I surely did. Thanks everyone for attending.
Thank you, Leonard. This was great.
Bye.